Hello and welcome to the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Tommy Brzee. We have a great show for you today. We are going to start with the Texas AD, Conte, giving some very interesting thoughts during his town hall meeting. Then we will get into the college football playoff and ESPN going together for another extension for 6 years. We will then jump into some instant impact freshmen from where I'm sitting, and then we have win totals that came out. So make sure you stick around for that. We have win totals. I will go through every conference and give you two teams. One team that I like to hit their win total, one team that I don't like so much to hit their win total. Before we start, though, I would like to ask you to like and follow the show. Also, we get tons of requests for questions throughout the show, and the best way to get your question read on air is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, streamelements.com/GSMCSportsNetwork./tip. It's very helpful not only to us, but to you all who ask questions, so you can see your question on the screen and I can get to it as quickly as possible. So use that screen if you would like to leave a tip, but let's jump right in. Why don't we? The Texas AD, Conte, had his town hall meeting, sort of a State of the Union for Texas athletics yesterday, and there were a couple of huge takeaways. And I think the number one takeaway for pretty much everyone watching was they will be working towards a 9-game schedule in the SEC moving forward. It seems like 2026 is the optimal start date for that. I think it's very interesting, partly because that will be the first year of a probably new playoff format, which there has been a lot of different ideas and things thrown out there for that, whether it's 6+6, whether it's 5+7, whether it's just no auto bids at all and entirely at large bids. The Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti has thrown out the idea of 16 teams, which is what the FCS does. So it'll be very interesting to see how those negotiations go, especially with this wrinkle added to it. Obviously, the SEC for the last couple of years has been an 8-game league. They've always been 8 conference games, and it's made things a little bit tough in terms of comparing a team from the SEC to a team from the Big Ten, because you play different level of competition for the most part. Teams like Georgia and Alabama, being able to face that fourth extra out-of-conference opponent, and for Georgia, playing Georgia Tech the last couple of years, it's been mostly a layup win. So I think it definitely does add to the gauntlet that is the SEC and has been the SEC for a long time, but also it does create a little bit more of a streamlined path in terms of deciding who's the better team between a SEC team and a Big 12 team or an ACC team. So it'll be interesting to see how that rolls. Also, a big thing of this is college football has been thinking about for a long time some type of uniform scheduling, whether that's across the board or in the Power 5 or whatever. This has been an idea that's been kicked around a lot. It's one that I really like. I think uniform scheduling across the board, whether that's everyone plays 9 conference games and has to play only FBS opponents, whether that's you play 8 games and you have one FCS opponent on your schedule. Regardless, I think a huge step in the future of college football is going to be this uniform scheduling model. And what does that mean for college football fans, and especially what does it mean for teams outside of the SEC when the SEC can tout this 9-game schedule against the toughest conference in the country? Same with the Big Ten, where the Big 12 and the ACC are starting to lose steam in that conversation, really, in a lot of different ways. So it'll be interesting to see how this kind of shakes up everything around the SEC, not only the SEC, but just to talk about the SEC a little bit, how this will affect teams coming in. I think, especially coming from the Texas AD, I think this holds a certain level of weight because there is this with Texas and Oklahoma coming into the league, I think they are new to these conversations, right? And so obviously, this 9-game SEC schedule has been something that has been kicked around a lot. It's something that Nick Saban even said he was very much in favor of during his time at Alabama, and he was never able to make it happen. But I think this could be finally the tipping point where you add Oklahoma and OU, or you add Oklahoma and Texas, excuse me, and you finally have 16 really quality teams, and you should be playing 9-game schedules. So it'll be interesting to see not only how the teams currently in the SEC and have been in the SEC for a long time adjust to that, but also a Texas team who will jump into the SEC and they'll play 8 conference games next year, and then 2 years down the road they'll have to add one more to the schedule. So I wonder if, in 3 years Texas is looking back on this decision and thinking maybe we should have stuck at 8 games, but I think that's something they'll have to worry about for another day. I think one of the big downfalls, I suppose, of this current model is in a 12-team or a 16-team playoff, the at-large bids are going to be a little bit harder to come by, especially with the 6+6 model they have going into 2024 and 5, where you have 6 conference champions and then 6 at-large. That's only 6 teams that can take up those spaces, and I think when you see the difference between the SEC and the Big Ten, it's easy to say that all 6 of those spots or 5 of 6 of those spots should go to those conferences. But at the end of the day, if you have Ole Miss sitting there who has played, 9 conference games in 2026 and has gone through an absolute gauntlet, and maybe they're 9-3, maybe they're even 8-4, but there's a genuine argument to be made that they're a top 12, top 16, whatever that looks like down the road. They could very easily be a top 12, 16 team, even with 3 or 4 losses on the schedule. So I think it's something that we should definitely keep an eye out on, because not only does it make it, the uniform scheduling, I think overall is a very good thing, but it does create an interesting conversation in the college football playoff room where you have to decide how much better is the SEC than the ACC, how much better is the SEC than the Big 12, or maybe even the Big 10, who knows. So I think it creates something of a dilemma that could possibly squeeze out some ACC and some Big 12 teams throughout this process. But at the end of the day, I really love the uniform scheduling model. I think it is a huge, huge help to college football. I think it, at the very least, helps teams in the SEC. There are a number of teams in the SEC that play neutral site games. 4 of the big ones, obviously, Texas, OU, Georgia, and Florida. That's a built-in game every year that you are either the home or away team, which then takes a home or away game from the team the following year. Basically, the home and away games are never even for those teams. They're always leaning one direction because of that neutral site game, counting as a home or an away game depending on the year. And I think this will give a lot of stability to that idea, where you can have Texas OU as a neutral conference game and still have Texas and Oklahoma have 4 home games and 4 away games. So there's not this big variability in terms of sometimes. I think Georgia had 7 home games or 8 home games last year, something like that. And Texas going into this year will have 7, and then the following year will only have 3 currently on the schedule. So it does create for some issues in terms of a level playing field in terms of how many games you're playing home and away. There is a stability to being someone like Arkansas or even Alabama, where you don't have to play that conference neutral site game. So I think this helps a lot of different aspects of the SEC schedule that I've been a little bit not the biggest fan of necessarily. I think this gives everyone a very clear definition of what a FBS, what a Power 5 schedule is supposed to look like. And not only that, but it does create that ability for teams like Texas and OU and Georgia and Florida to keep those games alive, to keep them where they are, because that's where they should be, both those games, and still have the home and away games the way they like them, and not have them all over the place, and not have to worry about, 1 year playing 7 and then the next year playing 4 home games, because that is a huge advantage or a huge disadvantage depending on which side of the coin you're on. So I think, although this is a big change for the SEC, and although there will be some people that will not be a huge fan of this because the SEC is the best conference, I really do love it. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think at the end of the day, the college football playoff, in whatever capacity that is in 2026, will have to make that decision of what is the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten and everyone else. And they'll have to see, is a 9-3 USC better than an 11-1 Texas Tech, or a 12-0 Texas Tech, God forbid. But I think there's a lot of interesting conversations that will happen in that room coming down the stretch, but still 2 years away from that. So still an 8-game schedule in the SEC right now, but tons to look forward to in the SEC come 2026. But some other interesting things that he dropped in there that would mainly be of interest to Texas fans, I won't lie to you, but I think there's, a little something for everyone. One of the main things is, as we all remember, when Texas and Texas A&M faced off, it was Thanksgiving night, and that's what it was all about. It was all about, eating dinner, sitting down in front of the TV, watching Texas A&M, one of the best rivalries in all of college football, and that went away. Obviously, the game went away, and next year they are playing on a Friday after Thanksgiving instead of on Thanksgiving. So Conte has made it clear that he does want to play on Thanksgiving. He would like to move that game a day forward, not necessarily this upcoming year, but going forward. And I think that's something that Texas and Texas A&M fans can get behind, no doubt about it. Also, he said he wants to move the Oklahoma game to 3:30, which I'm not necessarily as big a fan of that. I love the entire setup of the Cotton Bowl as it is right now. But at the end of the day, the CBS 3:30 slot, keeping Texas OU out of that on that weekend is going to be pretty tough. So I wouldn't be surprised if that were to happen. And finally, he did say that he would like to play more in-state schools. So obviously, A&M would hopefully be on the schedule every single year, and that's what he hopes as well. But also, he wants to schedule teams like Texas Tech, TCU, possibly even an SMU team that is making the jump to the ACC next year. So I think that's a huge deal for not only Texas fans, because you love playing Texas Tech, you love playing TCU, you love playing Baylor, those teams that are a drive from you, but also just huge news for Texas Tech, for TCU. They hate Texas. There's no secret about that. They hate Texas and Oklahoma, and they really want to play those teams because every time you play them, you get a chance to make a big statement. So I think there is a ton to look forward to, not only in the SEC as a whole going forward, but if you are a Texas fan, I mean, there's a ton of little nuggets there that I'm sure you really enjoyed. And Conte continues to be a very impressive athletic director and, keep Texas moving in the right direction. I think the 9-game SEC schedule, along with all the other things that he somewhat promised throughout this town hall, I think will be a huge part of that. But we are going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about the media deal between the College Football Playoff and ESPN, and some ESPN, Fox, Warner Bros., all those people teaming up for a possible streaming service. So stay tuned. We will be right back. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a...
Alrighty, welcome back in. We just talked about the Conte Town Hall at Texas yesterday and the possible move for the SEC to a 9-game schedule. Now we're going to jump into the media deal between the College Football Playoff and ESPN. But before we do that, I want to remind you all that if you would like to ask a question throughout the show, we get tons throughout the show. And if you want yours to be read as soon as possible, you can use the link at the bottom of the screen, streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. It is a huge help not only to us here at the network, but also to you all to hear your questions answered and make sure that I can get to them as quickly as possible. So if you'd like to submit a question, you can do it there. But let's jump right in. We have a huge blockbuster deal. The College Football Playoff and ESPN has agreed to a media rights extension for the college football games. This will take the agreement between the CFP and ESPN into 2031. So ESPN has control for quite a while. And there will be, I'm sure, tons of changes between now and then. So the question is, what does the playoff look like in terms of how many games is ESPN really getting out of this? And also, what does college football look like? And what does the formatting of all of the playoff and everything around it look like? And I think all of that will play a huge part in not only how this deal looks, 6 years from now or even 5 years from now, but also it will be a huge point of contention when you come to 2025 and you have to renegotiate these contracts. There's a huge deal over the next 2 years in college football. It's going to be a 12-team playoff. That's what we know. But after that, there is a lot up in the air. I talked a little bit on the first segment about all the different options being thrown around. It seems like the Big Ten is comfortably behind the idea of a 16-team playoff, much like the FCS. So that would definitely be something to watch, where ESPN now has triple the games possibly, and they have the ability to really kind of corner that market on most of the postseason, of college football. When you talk about college football nowadays, bowl games kind of become an afterthought because of the craziness that is December in college football, but I think, especially with the expanded playoff, it's going to be a lot of, if you're not in the playoff, we're not going to talk about you too much after conference championship week. So it is a very interesting flip, not only to the structure of the playoff and the structure of college football, but it does change the way that other programs are going to get talked about around the country. There are tons of very good second-tier programs that will most likely fall short of being in the 16 or the 12-team playoff. But if you're team 17, you're a pretty good team, but it might be tough for you to get any time on TV much during that December craziness that we call the college football schedule right now, which is something I will absolutely get into in shows to come. But I think one of the very interesting layers of all of this is ESPN, Fox, and Warner Bros. Have all just decided to partner up for a possible streaming service. Now, ESPN and Fox are obviously the kingmakers in college football. They are the people that call the shots. They are the people that make most of the big decisions. Whether or not a lot of fans know that or not, I don't know. But when it really comes down to it, the media markets and the media companies are the ones that set the pace for college football in every way, pretty much. So, seeing the two media markets, ESPN and Fox, they are pretty much all of college football. Fox has, huge ties to the Big 12 and the Big 10, ESPN, ACC, SEC. So there is a ton that can be done with this. I think one of the things that they will absolutely look towards doing is not only having all college football games kind of centered into one app, one area, which I think college football fans would love, but also I think it does create a certain level of, I suppose, there is this certain layer where ESPN has decided to move forward with the college football playoff, and it's interesting that they did this not, a week and a half, 2 weeks after this announcement was made between them and Fox that they were partnering up. And I think it's very interesting because the college football playoff probably could have made a little bit more money in this grand scheme of things if they were to partner with ESPN and Fox. So I wonder what's happening behind the scenes there between the executives at ESPN and the executives at Fox, because I'm sure Fox wanted a piece of that cake and they weren't able to get it. So I wonder not only what does this mean for college football in a lot of ways, but what does it mean for this possible partnership that they have going forward? Will Fox be a little bit perturbed that ESPN did not think about them while making this decision? But still plenty to figure out there. But in terms of the streaming service, as of right now, it looks like there's going to be pretty much a one-stop shop for college football, which is an incredible thing for big-time college football fans that, like me, flip around to 5 or 6 or 7 different games at a time. And it makes it really hard when you have 10 different streaming services all over the place trying to figure that out. So I think it'd be a very interesting thing. I think also one thing that might be on the way, or at least this is a kind of a hopeful thing for my perspective, but one thing that could possibly be on the way is a college football red zone style production. And I think that would be, first of all, just incredible. It would require a person with maybe 18 eyes to keep track of all of the different touchdowns going on around the country, but at the end of the day, it would just be a remarkable product, I think. I think it would bring a lot more eyes to some teams that people don't watch nearly as often. I think there are really, really talented players across the country. I think we all know that, but you don't see a lot of them. I mean, a guy that just transferred to Texas A&M, Nick Scourton, who is a wildly talented edge rusher and played really, really good football while he was at Purdue. Not a lot of people really knew his name until he found his way to Texas A&M, and I think that's kind of the reality of college football right now. But with this new deal, with not only ESPN partnering with the college football playoff and possibly having those on the streaming service, but having two of the biggest, shareholders in the grand scheme of college football together and hopefully working together in harmony will be super important, not only to the media part of all this and keeping everything in college football media in the same place, but also it just really helps the sport. I think it helps the sport get to a place where you have a genuine governing body. You have a genuine, a place to look where there is no type of confusion of what the rules are. There's no type of confusion between relationships getting in the way, which is what it's felt like a lot with the NCAA. There's been a lot of different allegations back and forth between whether it's them in Michigan or them in Tennessee and Virginia going at it right now over NIL. The NCAA has been in a lot of headlines, and they've been in a lot of headlines kind of looking like the group that's losing these battles that, in a lot of ways, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, a decade ago, they would have easily won. So it's obviously a changing of the guard in college football, and I think college football playoff, ESPN, Fox, Warner Bros, all of these people being affiliated in some way, being part of the same team, at least in the grand scheme of things, is huge for the enjoyment of college football fans getting to see all of the games they want, getting to see all the teams they want, and also casual college football fans being able to flip into a red zone type deal and that type of broadcast and just see what casual fans want to see: really cool touchdowns, really cool interceptions, that type of thing. So I think it's a huge help not only to both these companies and moving them forward and possibly some cross-platform promotion, but also just the college football landscape. I think it brings a whole new level of viewer. It brings in a whole new level of people that can access this and can get into college football, because let's be honest, there are a lot of people that can't afford 5 or 6 different streaming services to watch all the teams they want to watch. But having all of those in one place, a one-stop shop, as long as it's not too expensive, I think it could be a fantastic thing for the sport and a fantastic thing for fans across the sport. So very excited to see what this could possibly lead to. I think the streaming service is going to be a huge help. But one of the wrinkles in all of this, particularly the college football playoff and ESPN deal that just happened, is Washington State and Oregon State are still sitting out there on the West Coast and kind of just hanging out. They are technically the Pac-12, but they are the Pac-2 for the time being, and they have shown very little signs of moving anywhere. They feel fairly confident with the schedules that they have going into 2024, and they really should, because they're playing a lot of teams that they should beat. But also, Washington State and Oregon State are really, really fighting for their place in the college football playoff. In the current format, it is 6 conference champions and 6 at-large bids, and they hypothetically could fall into that 6 conference championships or champions that get in. But that does need to be approved by the college football playoff. They do need to be able to convince that to them. And, when you only have 2 teams to create a vote for something like that, very easy to pull off. But it'll be interesting to see how that develops into, is Washington and Oregon State entirely squeezed out? Do they have to earn an at-large bid instead of having a auto bid in the 6x6 format? But that's definitely something to watch in this whole thing, because Washington State and Oregon State have kind of sat pat for a little bit here. They've obviously been fighting with the college football playoff and been doing a number of different things around. But at the end of the day, they have shown very little signs of jumping ship, and I think it's very interesting. I think that could change very, very quickly if the college football playoff, decides you're going to have to earn an at-large bid if you want to be in. I think it's very possible the second that call comes through, Oregon State and Washington are calling the Big 12 commissioner, Brett Yormark, they're calling him and essentially just taking the offer and moving to the Big 12, because at the very least that gives you a seat at the table. That gives you a possibility for an auto bid, and it'll be interesting to see how all of that develops. There's tons of different things that will come out of this, and tons of different stories, obviously. But for right now, the college football playoff is staying with ESPN. Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit will still be the voices calling the national championship game, which is the way I like it. But would have loved to hear Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt go at it as well for a playoff game, but we'll have to wait a little bit for that. But we're going to take a short break here, and then we will come back and we are going to talk about some instant impact freshmen that will have to be huge for their teams to make a national championship run. So we will be right back, and we'll see you after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back. We just talked about the deal between the College Football Playoff and ESPN for a 6-year extension for ESPN to carry the media rights with the College Football Playoff through 2031, and all of the implications of that, as well as ESPN, Fox, and Warner Brothers combining for a possible streaming service, which would transform the world of college football media. There's no doubt about that. So a lot to keep tabs on there. But now it's time for instant impact freshmen. It is officially, recruiting is over. Officially, there might be some guys that get released from their national letter of intent. There might be a couple stragglers here and there. But at the end of the day, the classes are pretty much set. So I wanted to go through and give you some people to keep an eye out on. There's going to be tons of guys across the country that have to step into big roles, with a lot of schools losing a ton in different positions. And I think it really starts at Alabama. Obviously, a huge exodus after Nick Saban retired. Tons of different position coaches leaving. Charvarius Robinson, probably the biggest among them. There's just tons to think about in Alabama right now. There's tons of fires to put out from Kalen DeBoer's side. But one of the fires that he was perfectly able to put out and was able to get him back on board is Ryan Williams. Someone that had decommitted from Alabama and entertained offers from Auburn, was one of the big teams. He took an official visit to Texas during that time, and then he took an official visit to Bama with the new staff, and there were great shots of him and all of his siblings taking recruiting pictures together. And after that, it was pretty much over. I think Bama won that day, and probably won it that second that he got all of his brothers and sisters into those pads and got to see them enjoy that moment with him. But he is a wildly talented wide receiver. He is someone that, other than Jeremiah Smith, who I will talk about later, number one player in the country, I don't think anyone in the wide receiver group really touches this kid. He can do absolutely everything. A remarkable route runner, crazy speed when he gets into open field, and just great hands. So he's someone that is a wildly talented guy, and he's going to have to play early. I really don't see another way that this goes down, if I'm being totally honest. They do have Kendrick Law back. They do have Kobe Prentice. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot of returning firepower, at least in the grand scheme of what Alabama is used to at that receiver position, with Devontae Smith, with Jalen Waddle, Henry Ruggs. The list goes on. It's just insane. Jerry Jeudy, just insane amounts of guys that have come out of there. And in recent years, it's been a little underwhelming. Still plenty of talent. Jermaine Burton and Isaiah Bond were a good duo last year, but not the duo that Alabama fans are used to. And I think Ryan Williams is a huge piece to get back to that normal, this is the Alabama receiving corps type vibe that they've usually had, where it rivals any position group in the country. And another group that has been just decimated from Alabama is the back end. I talked about Caleb Downs in an earlier show. We had Antonio Kite decide to leave. Trey Amos is heading to Ole Miss. Someone's going to have to play among the freshmen, Jalen Mbakwe, Xavier Brown, and Xavier Mincy. one of those guys is going to have to play and play a lot. If I'm being totally honest, possibly two of those guys. Jalen Mbakwe, number 12 player in the country, very, very talented. I think he's the guy that a lot of Alabama fans have tabbed as the freshman that's going to break out, much like Caleb Downs did last year before he found his way up to Columbus, Ohio. And I think all of these guys are plenty capable. All of these guys can, play football at a very, very high level. But there is, a new coach in town, and Maurice Lindquist taking over the DBs there. And during his time at Buffalo as the head coach, he was a huge piece to that secondary, playing really, really good football at times. A guy, one of their safeties, Devin Grant, is a transfer going to Syracuse this next year, and I think he's someone that people will have to keep an eye on because Maurice Lindquist did a fantastic job with him throughout his time at Buffalo. But one of those guys is going to have to play. One of those guys is going to have to make his mark, much like a freshman Derek Stingley did for the 2019 LSU team. Someone's going to have to be, a semblance of that guy if Alabama wants to do what, Alabama's used to doing, which is being in the playoff, competing for national titles year in and year out. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But we'll go over to Georgia. We'll stick in the defensive backfield, though. Ellis Robinson III and KJ Bolden, those are two of the most talented guys in the entire class. Ellis Robinson III, it feels like every time you see him at a workout doing one-on-ones, he never loses. For whatever reason, it doesn't matter the receiver, it doesn't matter the height advantage, whatever. He makes plays, and he is a remarkable coverage corner. He is someone they're going to absolutely need with Kamari Lassiter walking out the door. You need someone to fill that role, and obviously you have guys like Dalen Everett already on the roster, but having someone like Ellis Robinson coming in really, really helps that. And then KJ Bolden is a safety out of Buford. UGA fans will know that the Buford curse was alive and well for a very long time, especially with Dylan Raiola deciding to flip to Nebraska, which is absolutely an impact freshman that I will get to. But flipping him was an absolutely huge flip. Him alongside Johnny Laguero and Malachi Starks. It's an embarrassment of riches over there in that safeties room, and with Charvarius Robinson leading them now, it could be just a remarkable group of players and really game changers on the back end for Georgia, kind of across the board. And those two guys are a huge part of that. But we'll move on to Texas here. And Texas last year, when you talked about their defense, it was all Tavondre Sweat. It was all Byron Murphy, the guys in the middle that were game wreckers, that were absolutely dominant. Both will be going early in the draft, probably the first 2 days. Both of them will be off the board, and they needed help edge rushing. They had a lot of pressures. They had a lot of hurries. They had a lot of the quarterback moving. They didn't have a ton of getting the quarterback on the ground last year. They were much better than a year prior, but they need elite edge rushers, and Colin Simmons is as elite of an edge rusher as there is. He has won back-to-back 6A Texas Defensive Player of the Game in state championships. So on the biggest stage, he makes the biggest plays. He is an absolute specimen. He can absolutely move. And one of the big issues with him coming into Texas, or one of the very few knocks that people had, was he is a little bit undersized for that edge rushing position. And then he decided to add 20 pounds the second he got on campus, pretty much. He's been there for about, a month and has already added 20 pounds, and it looks like it's just pure muscle. So he is definitely someone to keep an eye out on, along with Ethan Burke, Barron Sorrell, the established guys there. He is someone that will absolutely play a part in that Texas pass rush. But the team that Texas will be facing off against in the Red River rivalry is Oklahoma, and they have two guys that are going to be huge and kind of have to be huge for them. We'll start with David Stone, a remarkable 5-star D lineman, and it's a guy that Brent Venables absolutely needed. The first 2 years of the tenure of Brent Venables, it wasn't that they were bad defenses. There was a huge improvement this past year, but Brent Venables plays defense a specific way. He has a specific type of guy. You know, those big, meaty linebackers, huge game wreckers up front that just eat space and dominate. And David Stone is that type of guy. So I think this is a huge pickup for Brent Venables. It gives him the ability to show what his defense can really be at Oklahoma. In the last 2 years, the personnel just wasn't where it needed to be. It's getting closer to that point now. So David Stone will play a huge part this year and also going forward in what Brent Venables is thought of in the world of Oklahoma coaching, 2 or 3 years down the road. But the other guy is Taylor Tatum, a wildly talented running back. I think the number one running back in the country, if I'm not mistaken. He will be joining a group with Gavin Sawchuk, who was a freshman last year, a very young duo in this group. And so there is always that concern how quickly Taylor Tatum can get up to speed. But if he does get up to speed quickly, man, these guys can fly. There's tons of very, very good running back duos around the country, including against at their rivals, Texas, with Jaden Blue and Cedric Baxter. But Taylor Tatum and Gavin Sawchuk have a chance to be as good as really anyone. If they're put in the right positions, if they, play smart and play fast, I think both those guys could have huge years, and Taylor Tatum could be a huge part of Gavin Sawchuk, really, really breaking out and, taking some of the need off his shoulders for Oklahoma to succeed in the run game. But finally, we have gotten to the best player in the country. Jeremiah Smith, he's number one almost across the board. The dude is absolutely insane. He makes every single play. He makes every single play look easy, which is something that not a lot of receivers have. There are plenty of receivers that can make really tough plays. There are plenty of receivers that can fly out of the box and do, remarkable things. But there's very few that can do all of those things and make it look like it's just another day at the office. And Jeremiah Smith is one of those guys. I mean, he's already joining a room that has been just littered with talent for as long as I can remember. And Brian Hartline is the reason for that. Brian Hartline is as important of a position coach as there is across the country. And adding him to a group with Carnell Tate and Brandon Innes, I think it's going to be a really, really good trio, especially if Will Howard can just put the ball on these guys' hands. Then you just let them fly. Then you just let them do their thing, and I can't wait to see what this team looks like with Jeremiah Smith in that kind of probably outside receiver, doing a little bit more dynamic routes, but it's going to be a really, really fun thing to watch, especially with Chip Kelly coming on to staff and adding a ton of talent and a ton of knowledge about how to get wide receivers open. So we'll quickly roll through the rest of these. We got L.J. McCray from Florida, a guy they needed to hold on to during this class, and they were able to do that. There's no secret. The SEC is one in the trenches, and if you don't have dudes like L.J. McCray, it's going to be a really, really long day. So I think while the schedule is really tough and he's going to have to go up against some absolute dudes, it's going to make him all the better for 2025 and 2026. So I think he's someone that's going to get tons of snaps early. Another guy that absolutely will get snaps, maybe even start from the get-go, is Micah Hudson, a wide receiver that's going to Texas Tech. He was highly sought after by pretty much every team in the country, but especially Texas and Texas A&M were all over this kid, and he decided to go to Lubbock, Texas, and I think it's a huge pat on the back to the group up there, Joey McGuire and his staff, because it's not easy to get a 5-star to come to Texas Tech. He was the only 5-star in the entirety of the Big 12 that signed this past class, and it proves that Joey McGuire is building something at Texas Tech. Now, you got to get this guy touches. You got to get this guy into the rotation because kids leave. It happens kind of at the drop of the hat now. So I expect Micah Hudson to be a huge part of what they do in 2024 and hopefully for Red Raiders fans for the next 3 years while he, builds out a remarkable resume next to some other just incredible receivers like Michael Crabtree. We got two more pass catchers here. Luke Reynolds is a tight end going to Penn State. Very, very athletic, very dynamic tight end, and that's very good because Theo Johnson's finding his way to the NFL. He was a huge part of their offense, not only in the pass game, but in the run game. I think Reynolds does give them a little bit more passing ability from their tight ends, which is huge because their new OC, Alex Koltanecki, excuse me for that pronunciation, from Kansas, he likes his tight ends, and he likes his tight ends to be very versatile, and I think he'll use him exactly that way. And I can't wait to see what he plays in the passing game next to a guy like Julian Fleming that they got from Ohio State. And then finally, Auburn pulled in just a remarkable class, but it started at the wide receiver room. Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson are just as good as it gets. I've talked about Jeremiah Smith. I've talked about Ryan Williams. If there's guys that are right there with that group, it's these two. And they're going to the same place, and they're going to a place that absolutely needs receivers. Peyton Thorne is going to need help next year. He's going to need, real game changers. And these two guys are absolute game changers. So, although, they are freshmen getting into an SEC league, I can't wait to see what these guys have in store for us because they could be absolutely insane. And excited to see what they can do in the Hugh Freeze offense. I think they will absolutely explode, and if they do, watch out for Auburn. And then finally, we will get to Dylan Raiola. Obviously, a huge flip from Georgia to Nebraska. He's going to be the guy. There's no two doubts in my mind. That's why he went there. He wants to be the guy that flips Nebraska, and it makes a ton of sense. I mean, his father went there. His uncle is on staff there. He wants to be the difference maker. He wants to be the guy that Nebraska fans talk about forever. And although that's a lot on his shoulders, this dude is as talented a quarterback as you'll see. His physical ability, his build is insane. He is an absolute athletic specimen, and I can't wait to see what he can do in his freshman year. It might be a little bit of a rocky start given he is a freshman, going into a Big Ten league, which defense is going to be for real. But I'm excited to see what he can do in not only this year, but in 2025 and moving forward for Nebraska, because he might just be the guy that brings them back to prominence in this sport. So excited to see what happens with him. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some win totals that came out for some teams. I'll give you a team that I love from each conference, a team that I don't so much love from each conference. So we will take a slight break, and then we'll be right back. Alrighty, welcome back in. We just talked about some instant impact freshmen that could be just huge for their teams to reach their massive heights going into 2024. And now we're going to talk about win totals. So a little bit of betting talk here. I will give you some teams that I like from each conference, some teams I don't necessarily love from each conference to hit the over or under on their win totals. But first, let's start with the teams that are kind of leading the way. Ohio State, Texas, UGA, and Oregon are all up at 10.5 wins, which is very interesting just seeing the difference in the win totals this year compared to last year. You used to see some teams that had 11.5 as their projected wins. Now it feels like 10.5 is about as high as Vegas is going to be willing to go with all of the incredible talent across those conferences. But it does feel like those four teams have kind of stood out in front of the pack, at least early on in the offseason. So not really surprised there. And then they're followed by Bama, Clemson, LSU, Ole Miss, tons of other teams at 9.5, which will fill out kind of the second tier of those conferences. But I do think Texas and UGA are the top of the SEC right now, and Ohio State and Oregon are the top of the Big Ten, at least at this very moment. That's the way I see it. So I think those are totally normal, totally fine. But let's get into some ones that I think are a little bit off one way or the other, and we'll start with the ACC and Georgia Tech. Their over-under is set at 5.5. I really like them to hit the over on this one. This was a team that had some very weird moments last year, namely the crazy finish in Miami, a game that they shouldn't have won but were able to. But I think the big thing for me here is returning Haynes King is huge. He led the league in pass touchdowns last year. Tons of weapons coming back. Eric Singleton, Rutherford. There's going to be guys for him to throw the ball to. And a guy like Buster Faulkner, who I have nothing but praise for. And if we ever do, some underrated coaches, he will absolutely be on that list because he has done incredible stuff just in 1 year at Georgia Tech. And I really do think he's going to be even better next year. They're bringing in a very talented tight end in Luke Harpering in this recruiting class. So I really like Georgia Tech to go bowling and the Brent Key era to continue to build, to continue to get better over there in Atlanta. And then a team I don't necessarily love in the ACC is a team that it seemed like everyone loved a year ago, which was Louisville. They went on to play in the ACC championship. Jack Plummer was huge for them the majority of the year. Didn't play the best ACC championship in the world, but was a huge part of their success. And I think it's huge that him and Jamari Thrash are no longer there. So having both those guys go out, you replace them with Tyler Shuck. They got Colin Lacey from South Alabama at receiver, who's very, very talented. They had one of the best portal classes of anyone in the country. But the way I look at it is Jack Plummer was very, very comfortable in the system that Jeff Brom was going to run. He had run it for a number of years at Purdue, and when he came to Louisville, it felt comfortable. It felt like he was going to hit the ground running because the system, it helps a whole lot. But losing him, I think, will be a huge part of this. Tyler Shuck is a very good player they got from Texas Tech who has starting experience, but he did lose his job a couple of different times at Texas Tech. He did struggle with consistency and all of these different things, and with the ACC getting better pretty much all around Louisville, with Miami, I talked about Georgia Tech. There's tons of teams that are going to get better in this conference, and I just don't think Louisville will be able to capture the same magic that they had last year. But who knows? Jeff Brom is a fantastic coach and was able to kind of pull a rabbit out of his hat last year, so we'll see if he can do it again in 2024. But we'll roll on to the Big Ten. A team I don't necessarily love is what we'll start here, and it's the Michigan Wolverines. And that sounds crazy. Their over-under is set at 9.5. And I know coming off a national title, it's very, very unlikely that they take a steep drop off a hill, and I don't necessarily expect that at all. I think Alex Orji and Donovan Edwards are going to be very, very talented in that backfield. I think they're going to run the ball really well because Sharon Moore is known for running the ball. That's kind of who he is. And so I don't think that's where the struggle will be. I think the big question mark is that offensive line and is those receivers. Losing Roman Wilson, losing Cornelius Johnson, they're going to have to rely on some young guys to really step up in that game, because if you can't throw the ball, it's going to be near impossible to run the ball, especially breaking in 5 new starting offensive linemen. It's going to be an uphill battle for Michigan, and although I tend to believe they'll go somewhere probably 9-3, really, I just think 9.5 is a little bit high for a conference that's expanding, getting better. Travel schedules will be weird next year. Tons of stuff working against Michigan, on top of having to replace tons of talent across the board. So I'm going to take the under on the Michigan 9.5 line, and then a team I like to hit the over is Wisconsin. The line is sitting at 6.5 right now, and I really do think they're going to get to 7 wins. I think it was a little bit of a rocky start last year. It was a huge change in terms of offensive philosophy and what they were going to do game in and game out when Phil Longo came over from UNC. And although they were able to run the ball effectively, they really did need a better passer, a guy that's more comfortable standing in the pocket and delivering balls the way that you need to. If you're going to play in the Big Ten, you have to fit balls into tight windows. You have to, make the right play and make the smart play. And they got a guy in Tyler Van Dyke from Miami who's played tons of football. And although last year was not necessarily a pretty year for Tyler Van Dyke at all, he is very, very smart. He will be able to pick up the offense fairly quickly, and then it just comes down to execution. And I think Phil Longo will have a much better idea of his personnel, much better idea of who he's going up against every week. You walk into a new conference, there's a lot of things you don't know about those defenses until you play them. So now having a year under his belt, I think, helps him a ton to get to that next level and to kind of move Wisconsin, keep the Luke Fickell Wisconsin train moving forward at the very least. But we'll jump over to the SEC, a team that I love to hit the over. This number is just way too low in my mind. Kentucky is at 6.5, and I just think you're giving Mark Stoops 6.5. The dude wins 7 games in his sleep. I think he is not going to miss a chance to win 7 games, especially with all the talent they brought in from the portal. Brock Vandegrift, Jamori Macklin from North Texas, Chip Trainum from Ohio State. There's tons of guys. And also, on the defensive side, having 2 guys on the D-line like Deone Walker in the middle, who is just a beast, and then J.J. Weaver on the outside rushing, it's a luxury that not a lot of people have. So I'm very excited to see what this Kentucky team can do. It's a little bit of a high ceiling, low floor type of team because of all of the changes that have happened around the offense, but I really do believe in Brock Vandegrift to make the plays that he needs to make and make the plays that, frankly, Devin Leary a year ago was not capable of making. So very excited to see this team. Barryon Brown is someone to keep an eye on with that team for sure. But finally, we have Texas A&M. I love the under at 8.5. This Texas A&M team is in a very interesting spot in terms of they just hired Mike Elko, and I really do like the Mike Elko hire. I think it makes just a ton of sense, not only for A&M, it gives them a lot of stability, but also that defense was, not nearly as good as it should have been given the prerequisite talent. You bring in a guy that had great defenses while he was there and then use lower level talent to have a very good defense at Duke. So I expect big things from Mike Elko. I think he's going to be very impressive. But at the end of the day, you're playing in the SEC. You have a quarterback who I think is very talented in Connor Wegman. But at the end of the day, there's some worry that he could go down. And if he does go down, they do have Jalen Henderson that played a lot of the bowl game. But at the end of the day, losing your starting quarterback, especially a guy like Connor Wegman, who was making big-time strides last year, could be a huge gut punch to this team. So it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back from that. But I see them landing somewhere around 7-5, 8-4 in Mike Elko's first year. And although I know there will be A&M fans that will not be too happy about that, it's going to take some time. And I think Texas A&M will be much better 2025, 2026. But I think 2024 might be something of a transition year at the very least in the Mike Elko era, something of a getting his footing in this crazy conference and being a head coach of a huge program with a lot of eyes on it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And then finally we have the Big 12, a conference that has been a little forgotten about in the grand scheme of things with everything happening around the Big 10 and the SEC, but still plenty of really, really good teams out there. And one team I love to hit the over, and some people will hate me for this, but Colorado, I love to go bowling. Their line is 5.5. I think they win at least 6 games. And the bottom line really is, if the offensive line is 25% better, if they're 30% better, if they're 50% better, whatever it is, they just need to give Shedeur Sanders time. That's all he needs. We know that he is a special athlete. We know he can make a number of throws that other guys in the country just can't make. But at the end of the day, he needs time to do all that stuff. He needs time to find Travis Hunter and to find Horn and to find Dylan Edwards and all of these incredible guys around him. You can't get him the ball if you're immediately running for your life. So I think he's someone that, as long as the O-line, as long as guys like Jordan Seaton and Tyler Johnson, as long as they are good on the corners and they are able to rebuild this offensive line in the portal the way they had hoped, I really do expect them to have a really solid year. I don't know if they'll make the playoff the way that Dion is seemingly promising, but I think they will have a very successful year, and at the very least will find themselves in a bowl game and possibly even find themselves up to 8-4. Who knows in this new conference? But I really do like Colorado to hit at least 6 wins, and Shedeur Sanders to be Shedeur Sanders and be absolutely special throughout the entire season. And then finally, one team that I like to hit the under that I think might be a little bit of a hotter take, if you will. I think Utah will not hit the 9.5 mark that has been set for them. I think one of the interesting things is obviously Cam Rising is returning. Now he's not the only person in that backfield that is made a decision about their future. Jaquindon Jackson has made his way to Arkansas, so that is obviously a huge blow to this team. There's a number of different guys, Cole Bishop moving on to the NFL. There's just tons of things going away from them, and I think there's this idea that Utah, they've been so successful in the Pac-12. They've been in the Pac-12 championship 2 out of the last 3 years, and Kyle Whittingham, in my opinion, is a top 7, top 10 coach in the entire country. So I think there's this idea that they're going to walk into the Big 12 and immediately just start rolling and compete for Big 12 championships and everything. And I just don't see it that way. I think this conference has 6 or 7 teams that are right around each other relatively. And I think Utah will just have to play too many of the toss-up games, I suppose, for them to get to that 9 mark. I don't think anyone in this conference is going to go into the conference championship with more than 2 losses, less than 2 losses, excuse me. I don't think we'll have an 11-1 team. I think this conference it's too packed up. There's too many teams that have roughly the same ability, roughly the same ceiling, that it's very hard for me to sit here and say Utah's going to walk in, win 10 or 11 games, and waltz right into the championship game in Dallas. So we'll see how that develops. Cam Rising's health is obviously a huge part of that equation. Bryson Barnes is no longer there, so a huge change in who will be taking over for him. So it'll be interesting to see how that team develops in their first year of the Big 12. But I tend to think they'll sit somewhere around 8-4, 9-3. But the Big 12 is a wildly inconsistent, confusing conference. So we'll see what happens there. But finally, that is all I have for you all today. Thank you so much for tuning into the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means so much to us. We hope you subscribe to the show and please leave a positive review. It really does help us a lot. Also, follow us on Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, or X, Instagram for more content and updates. We got people running every sport you can think of and covering it from start to finish 24 hours a day. So definitely follow along on all of those. But thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go.